Prehistoric times. The period has not been specifically determined in time, but in general, scientists have worked hard to determine it approximately before the years 3100 BC, meaning before history was recorded or before man knew how to write. It was called the Stone Age because all the tools used during this era were made of stones for some period. Prehistoric is the period that begins from the first appearance of man until the beginning of writing, and includes the first human civilizations, known as the cultures of the Stone Ages. The difference between this period and historical periods appears in the absence of references and written sources, which requires extrapolation of archaeological remains, which are the material remains, whether movable or immovable, which are considered as the only witness to human activities in his environment. It is also stated that the emergence of the simplest forms of life on Earth occurred from 3.8 years ago, a billion years. But the appearance of the first hominins did not happen until 7 million years ago. But my friend the viewer, if you want to know more about the era's prehistory and how did the ancient Egyptian live his life at the beginning of creation, then you must follow today's video with us until the end. But as usual, before we begin our episode, do not forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell button so that everything new is delivered to you. You who are disruptive in this, we will begin our journey together, writing a god. Time and we travel through historical eras, and the first eras are the prehistoric eras, in which primitive man lived his life before he knew his craft. Agriculture, before settlement from the valley to the delta, and before any inscriptions or writings were recorded. And for this reason, scientists call this period of time the Stone Age. And this is because man was making all his tools from stones and wood, and from here he began his journey in searching for metals and extracting them from the ground. The Stone Age will be divided into three main sections. From about 3,500 to 3,200 years BC, the prehistoric period is divided in turn. There are two stages, the Upper Paleolithic or Paleolithic and the Neolithic or Neolithic, with the presence of an intermediate transitional era called the Mesolithic or Mesolithic, and the Stone Age in general. Its three sections are the Lower Paleolithic, the Middle Paleolithic, and the Upper Paleolithic. We will begin with the Lower Paleolithic here. The ancient Egyptian man began to search for stability and his requirements for tools used in daily life, and he himself began to manufacture tools. A primitive hand tool to protect himself from animals. These tools were also used to slaughter and skin animals. Not only that, he also began to use these simple tools to cut plants and drop plants from trees. The most common stone he had with him during this period was the button stone, and the tools were often the size of a fist. This is due to its ease of use and mastery, but the beginning of the life of Stone Man was in low places where rain was consistent. Some researchers worked hard to find out the beginning of man in this period, and it was said that he was present in North Africa and East Asia, where there were aspen forests at that time. And the plateaus of Egypt received abundant rain, and he began to settle in these plateaus. When the region dried up from the rain and became clear, the scientists found on the plateaus some tools that it was used by the ancient Egyptian, and that is why it was called the fourth geological time. But let us know what the fourth geological time means. Originally, in the year 1929, the scientist Desnour began searching for places in which there were large concentrations of water, and he began to conduct analysis on them in order to reach the form of the first human. But in fact, it was not only him who began to work on this subject. Some other scientists worked hard to collect and classify stone tools, and the scientists came up with methods. The livelihood and culture in which the first man lived during the Lower Paleolithic era, or first the stone industries that were based on converting gravel from its natural shape, was for tools that were simple in the beginning, and this was done by removing a single piece called an inch, one-sided, then two-sided, and after that it developed into multi-page trim pebbles, or what is called multifaceted pebble, and finally pebbles prepared in a spherical shape, and after that it became the pebble and took the shape of a triangle. The most famous sites in which it was found. It was Kenya and Ethiopia, where rough tools were found for cutting and making weapons, and this civilization was exhausted. With the civilization of trimmed pebbles, which are the oldest stone tools in the whole world, man spread to Asia and Europe coming from Africa, and its tools were distinguished by their simplicity with the least effort. The most famous stones at that time were the two stones, swan, and quartz, and it is not known until now whether the industry was local or whether there were migrations from East Africa and among the most prominent civilizations. My friend, who went through the Lower Paleolithic age, discovered for the first time in Saint-Michel, France, what it means. It was a two-faced industry, and its beginning dates back to 1.6 million years ago in a site in South Africa, and in a second site in Palestine, it is estimated at 1.4 million years ago. As for Europe, its oldest site is the Abbeville site, about 100,000 years old. Look, my friend, the oldest archaeological remains of the Acheulean civilization are in Africa. The eastern side is 1.5 million years old and is distinguished by its two-faced shape, the primitive and small axes that are unique to the African Achule, in addition to the so-called splinter industry, which consists mainly of scrapers and scrapers. This civilization in this region of the world was associated with moderate humans. One of the most famous sites of the Achule civilization in East Africa is its location in Ethiopia, and the Acheulean industry is plucked from North Africa. And from here we began to know the well-known stone tools. It has two faces and contains the remains of animal bones such as elephants, caracs, and zebras. The scientist Enuma Elish also created a unique industry with animal bone remains in the atom of moderate man, who was called Atlas Man. The archaic industries are represented by the so-called primitive, two-sided, and the first-hand axes, triangles, and the splinter industries in North Africa. And from here begins a new era, which is the Middle Paleolithic, and the Stone Age begins. The Middle Ancient one is about 250 years old and ends at about 20,000 years ago. Known by its scientific name Malo-Syriac or the Malo-Asterian era, it is one of the civilizations of the Middle Paleolithic in the Pensi period due to its location in Mosty, western France. It appeared between 100,000 years BC and 35,000 years BC and spread in Africa, Asia, and Europe. Among its most important features are the diverse and precise tools for human control over industrial techniques.